Welcome and thank you so much for coming. This is the Seed Grant Planning Information Session for the Humanities Without Walls Grand Challenge Research Grant Opportunity. My name is Antoinette Burton and I'm the director of the Humanities Research Institute, which is our campus humanities center, as many of you will know. And I'm also the PI, the principal investigator for the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation funded grant, Humanities Without Walls. We'll be telling you today a little bit about the larger grant and also the seed grant funding opportunity. Just a brief overview of how the information session will go. Jason's going to spend less than 5 minutes telling you a little bit about HWW as a whole. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about the Grand Research Challenge opportunity here at Illinois and our seed grant planning outline, and then Jenny is going to talk for about 10 minutes about her role in helping us operationalize this conceptually and in other ways, and then we'll finish up our portion of it with Jason walking us through the PDF that we've put in the chat, giving us some dates and deadlines. So and then at the end we'll take questions and we'll take them through the chat, and you can put questions in the chat as we're talking, of course, if we notice them, we'll answer them along the way, but we'll definitely be devoting, the last, hopefully, better part of half an hour to taking your questions. So I'm going to let Jason begin.
All right, so here's my elevator speech on the history of Humanities Without Walls. In 2014, we received a grant for $3 million from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to found a consortium of 15 universities, most of which were members of the CHCI, which is now the Big Ten Academic Alliance. And this consortium was founded, it's the second, I think, humanities consortium after the Central New York Humanities Corridor, but it is the first of this scale. So when we were founded, we were 15 institutions extending from Lincoln, Nebraska to Penn State, and northwards into Wisconsin and Michigan, and southwards to Urbana and Bloomington, Indiana. The consortium was founded with two different and essentially initially unrelated research goals in mind. The first and less connected to today's presentation is the goal of exploring career diversity for doctoral students in the humanities, what we were calling 6 years ago alt-ac, in which we are trying to avoid now, like COVID-19, that phrase in favor of career diversity, the idea that academic skills can be used within and outside the academy. But more relevant for today's conversation, the other initiative that Humanities Without Walls was created to address was a grand research challenge modeled in some part on the grand research challenges in the sciences, where multiple collaborators in multiple disciplines, and in the case of Humanities Without Walls, from multiple consortial partner institutions, would work together on research questions that were deemed larger than one individual or discipline or university to tackle alone. And so in the beginning, that research challenge focused on the theme of the global Midwest. And so in 2015, as the first workshop was winding down and we were just figuring out how to get the first round of research challenge awards into the hands of the PIs and beyond, Antoinette Burton came on as our PI after the initial PI, Diane Harris, had left. And the Andrew Mellon Foundation asked her to draft a renewal grant, which she did in consultation with the Foundation Relations Office. And that renewal grant built on those two initiatives, but tried to make them not quite so disconnected. So for the career diversity initiative, one of the innovations that Antoinette added was that we would extend our call from the 16 members of the consortium to a national audience for 2 of the 5 years of the workshop. And we got such a resoundingly successful response that we have decided that in future iterations, the calls are going to be national as well. More germane again for this conversation, we did the second research challenge. The theme changed to the work of the humanities in a changing climate. And there, that changing climate can be understood as broadly metaphorical as changing climates in nursing education or in history classrooms to something as literally strict as geophysical climate change, the Earth getting warmer because of CO2 emissions on the parts of human beings. So that was where the research challenge went. We also added a second component, which is where Peggy really initially entered Humanities Without Walls, was we added a graduate lab practicum to the research challenge. And the idea there was that in the first 2 years of the global Midwest, we noticed that oftentimes when graduate students were involved in the research, it was in relatively mundane roles as gophers or coffee preps instead of as research partners. And so Antoinette insisted that the graduate students be involved in these research projects as full research partners. And so the grad lab practicum was an attempt to address this need within those research challenge awards. So 5 years on, last year we were invited again by the Mellon Foundation to apply for a second renewal, and we did. And this summer we received that grant of $5 million, which brought our total up to $12.2 million. And we're going to be expanding into a lot of new areas with this renewal. We're going to be working on having a podcast. But again, the most germane part to the conversation today is that the theme for the third round of the research challenge, if we have a theme, it's Humanities Without Walls, very broadly. As I like to say, it's our self-titled album. But it's less about a particular research theme than it is about methodologies of reciprocity and redistribution. And I think this is the great part, the point where I hand the microphone back to Antoinette, because I think that's really what we're going to talk about here today and for the next couple of months is reciprocity and redistribution.
That's right. Thank you so much, Jason, for that really interesting and accurate historical account of HWW. So just to reiterate, we have a website, hww.illinois.edu, where you can go and see all the history that Jason has just recounted on both the career diversity side and on the Grand Research Challenge side. We funded 39 unique projects on the Research Challenge side, and you can see all those under the two themes, Global Midwest and Work of the Humanities in a Changing Climate. If you're interested, you can also see all 149 career diversity fellows who've graduated, including in both of those categories, some folks from Illinois. And as Jason said, it's true, there are no themes like Global Midwest or Changing Climate for this round. What there are methodologies, and Jason has alluded to those, and those methodologies are reciprocity and redistribution by design. And I think Peggy is posting in the chat the link to the initiative description, which you can read there. And what I'd like to say is that the reason for not embedding themes in the renewal grant was that there were many partners across the 16 institutions who felt that the themes were a little too constricting. The first one was decided by Diane Harris, my predecessor. The second one I decided with some input from the consortium, but as Jason suggested, I kind of arrived in the job and then suddenly we were in renewal. So I don't think there was necessarily a huge consensus about either of those themes. And so some people felt they were too constrictive. And so we decided to listen to the feedback from the consortium and not go with a theme, but we wanted to embed a commitment to some concepts, and I've taken to calling them methodologies, which are reciprocity and redistribution by design, which is to say that all of the Grand Challenge proposals we'll need to demonstrate how those two principles are built into the conception of the project. So the project can have any theme, it can have any title, but it needs to be redistributing the goods and assets that the project produces to public audiences, and it needs to be partnering both with institutions and with institutions or with community partners to help realize the project. And on the presumption that what we need is some better understanding of how to do that, which is not self-evident for many humanists accustomed to applying for single person grants like at the ACLS, although some of those are also collaborative, but Guggenheim's, NEH's, the presumption is still in the consortium that not everyone knows how to think or work collaboratively. And so we've got a whole year between now and when the Grand Research Challenge applications are due to have some programming on our campus where we hear about people who do this for a living and hear them talk about some of the models that they have. So the timeline for the seed grant year, which is between now and when the proposals are due in November, builds in some opportunities for workshopping in the fall and workshopping in the spring, builds in an opportunity for summer money for teams to apply for that summer money so they can work on their applications over the summer. And also we'll be drawing to your attention some resources that can help you think about how to create the multiplier effect in your project idea that we're asking for. And those include an HWW experts database, which Peggy will be developing, and that'll be available by the end of October. That is to say, a database that helps you easily find through cross-referencing if you're interested in environmental justice, if you're interested in the classroom, if you're interested in art and design, you'll easily be able to find HWW award winners and project participants who've been doing that work. And then as we speak, our great friends at Michigan State University, led by Bill Hart-Davidson, their Associate Dean for Research in their College of LAS, they're developing a webinar on collaboration that they're going to be producing also around the end of October that we'll be sharing out with everyone. They've had an enormous amount of success in every aspect of HWW at MSU, despite the fact that they actually have no humanities center, that their Associate Dean for Research in the Humanities has been really a spearheader of a lot of great projects there. So that's an interesting story. And of course, we have amazing Illinois resources here, which as I have learned after 5 years working with our consortial partners is very rare and unique to Illinois. We have the rapid services in the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, which many of you know, led by Cynthia Oliver and Maria Jo Lombardo. And I think Peggy can also put that link into the chat. And Cynthia and Maria have graciously agreed to work with faculty here on campus as they begin to think about their seed grant applications and also their ultimate Grand Challenge Research applications. So lots of information there. Hopefully the chat is helping. I'd like to turn this over now to Jenny Davis, our colleague, as I said, in anthropology and American Indian Studies, to whom we are grateful for helping lead us through some of the methodologies and ethical practices that she lives and breathes in her work as an anthropologist and also as Director of American Indian Studies. And she's agreed, we're very grateful that she's agreed to help us by guiding some of the program and all the programming in the fall and bringing really powerful local examples before us of people who are doing this work. So without further ado, actually, Jenny, I'll just turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Antoinette and Jason, for that presentation and that overview and that introduction. I think I know the majority of the folks here, and I'm looking forward to getting to know better anyone who I don't know. I was really excited to see that reciprocity and redistribution had been built into the grant. It had already been submitted and funded by the time I found out about it, and I was really excited to see those as themes for this version of Humanities Without Walls. And there's a piece of the information that really stood out, right, of thinking about them as methods for engaging in genuinely equal and ethical partnerships. So I guess my goal here is to kind of think about, what does that mean and how do we do it? And how do we do it when, for many of us, this is not part of the training we receive within our discipline or disciplines, and we're all at different stages of grappling with these questions. So some people are going to be considering these questions for the first time, and some people are going to be Faye Harrison, who literally wrote one of the books on it. So we're all coming from different places and different approaches, and coming together to have a conversation. So in order to get at that a little bit, I thought I'd introduce kind of where I'm coming from it and what my background is in thinking about these questions. So I am drawing on 15 years of research with Indigenous communities, but I'm also a queer Native American woman who is drawing on my own life experiences with my own communities where I primarily base my research. And so the impacts of the ethics and the methods of my research affect not just some distant research community, but really impact my local and communal and tribal networks, my close friends, and in a lot of cases, my family. And because I am from the Chickasaw Nation, I am from a community and other types of communities who have centuries-long experience with researchers who have caused harm with extractive and exploitive and deeply non-reciprocal research methods. And where the specter of academic researcher exists as the monster under the bed, right? This always lurking threat in our familial and community narratives. So I'm very passionate, both personally and professionally, in thinking about how to make research and related collaborations as reciprocal and as redistributive and as ethical as possible. I think it's a really good framework to be thinking about reciprocity and redistribution as the foundations of research, and then going from there to figure out how we manifest that in the principles of our methods. It requires us to address the historical and institutional and community and individual level asymmetries of power that are embedded in our research, and figure out really concretely how to address those. But it also, from my perspective, I would argue, really enhances our research, where we are incorporating expertise and experience and knowledge that we don't get if we don't approach research in this way. I think there are a number of challenges, and those are the things that we'll be talking about. Again, this in many ways calls for us to produce a radical reconfiguration of things like deadlines and timelines and priorities and boundaries that are components of our projects. And quite often the method section functions in kind of a copy and paste treatment, and we're asking people to flip it on its head, right, and make that the center of the conversation and really a deep point of consideration. It means that it's not pre-decided. It means that we actually go into these things not knowing the outcome, and that is both not something that the academic process rewards generally, but it's also kind of a scary way to go in, right? To have no idea what the outcome will be, or even how we're going to go about doing these things. So to have this conversation and to really broaden out the ways that we're thinking about it, let me see if I can, let's see if I'm coordinated enough to share my screen here. And then this one. All right, so we have designed this in a format of conversation, right? And also getting to hear from people who are utilizing these approaches and demonstrate these skill sets in their own work. I'll be giving a general overview and discussion about methods and ethics in collaborative and reciprocal research, drawing very strongly on how this work is considered within Indigenous and decolonial approaches on October 19th at 4 p.m. And on November 6th, we actually have 2 scholars on campus who have considerable experience doing this work in very different contexts. So Cora Maldonado, who is in American Indian Studies and Anthropology, will be presenting on her work with the Maya Interpreters Collective and other initiatives with the Maya communities here in the Champaign-Urbana general area. And on the same presentation, or same program, we'll be hearing from Ruby Mendenhall, who is affiliated with most of campus. Phenomenal accomplishment: sociology, African American studies, social work, Carle School of Medicine, I think IGB. And she's part of a number of initiatives that also do this. The Sea Hearts Collective, who we heard from Tuesday night, that also address these themes, and I think maybe we'll try to make that available to folks. And Designing Spaces of Hope, and her most recent initiative, the Communiversity Think and Do Tank. So we're gonna have 2 different events where we can hear from people, see examples, start to have conversations about the possibilities and the challenges of this approach. And then we'll also be putting together a bibliography of resources and readings that are about this topic and examples of things that people can look at and really read through to start to answer the questions as they pertain to their own research projects.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jenny. I guess I might just say that I think you might be sensing a kind of theme here emanating from HRI in relationship to some of these conversations. So the emphasis on methodology, which we see in HWW, has its echo in the Training in Digital Methods for Humanists that HRI also got some money for, on the conviction that one of the things that interdisciplinarity does is that it helps us to develop shared vocabularies and practices in addition to whatever we might be drawn to in terms of the content. Not that content and method are separable, but that methodology is something that as humanists we can really we can develop a shared understandings of and learn from each other. And I guess too that what we see happening with a lot of humanities work, both sponsored and not sponsored right now at this moment, is the urgency of the call for humanists to get involved in on the ground contemporary problems. And the reciprocal and redistributive aspect of that is that humanities research will thereby also be changed. So what looked like research 10 years ago in the humanities will still exist undoubtedly, but that we're interested in producing conversation about and also new forms of humanities research. Ideally those that are more engaged intentionally with communities, that are also public facing in more than just as an afterthought or a digital presence, but also I think really remind us that academic knowledge is not the only kind of knowledge. And if we do believe that, how can we respect that and produce work that actually takes that premise and makes it real here at the University of Illinois and beyond. So I think what Jenny has planned for us is really exciting, and I just hope that you'll all be able to put those dates on your calendars and come and hear our colleagues, and perhaps even think of them as future partners, if not for an HWW grant, then for other things as well. So Jason's going to run through, just in this last little portion of the first half an hour, the final details on one of these PDFs that Peggy has posted in the chat. Jason, do you want to just run through the deadlines?
So on October 19th, there is going to be a collaborative, reciprocal, and redistributive models of research with Jenny, as she noted in her talk a minute ago. On November 6th, there's going to be a second presentation with Dr. Corinta Maldonado and Dr. Ruby Mendenhall. The seed grant RFP we're going to be publishing in March 1st of 2021. And at the same time, we're going to publish the actual CFP for the first round of the Grand Research Challenge on March 1st as well. So those will be 2 calls for proposals on the same day issued. The first round, excuse me, The first deadline for the seed grant application, the first round of that will be April 15th of next year. And the application deadline for the actual Grand Research Challenge will be November 15th of next year. And again, I have these all in a single file that I will post. Again, it looks like Peggy just did, so anyone can download that for their convenience. But those are the timeline dates that we've got laid out so far. There's also going to be some spring programming potentially, but we don't have those dates pinned down yet.
So Nancy Castro's here, and she's posted a question in the chat, which, you know, you probably heard me slip and slide a little around. So in the first two cycles of the Research Challenge Grant, so before this renewal, it was a requirement that you had to have an institutional partner inside the consortium. So all of the partners are all of the grants were multi-institutional. We're actually trying to determine whether that's going to be a requirement rather than a recommendation, because we also are thinking of how important it would be potentially for people to partner with institutions that are not in the consortium, which are the majority of institutions in the United States. So everywhere from Parkland College to I don't know where else, including minority serving institutions, as well as community partners. So we haven't written the call for proposals that Jason referred to that'll be coming out in March, in part because we kind of want to, apropos of what Jenny was saying, we don't want to predetermine what it's going to look like. We're going to be running our seed grant, experiences here. Seed grant experiences are happening in 15 other institutions across the consortium between now and the spring. And so we're going to be, getting feedback from our partners on what people are saying, and we're going to be constructing the CFP on that basis. There will be a correlation between the seed grant call for proposals and the research challenge call for proposals, of course. So they will not be cattywampus at all. But so in response to Nancy's question, we haven't totally nailed that down yet. We kind of want to see what's happening. And it is true that in the 39 unique research awards that we have given out over the last 5 years, people did chafe a little against the inability in those competitions to partner with people outside the consortium. And so the consortium had something to prove in the first 5 years. It needed to prove that it was a consortium, and now it's in its last 5-year phase. And so I think we can afford to be more elastic about that. One thing that I would say, and Jason, I've learned at the knee of Jason on this, it's easy enough to say you're going to partner with, Governor State University, or I can't think of any, Wake Forest or whatever. The truth is that the actual financial pathways for partnership are very well established inside the consortium. And that is not nothing, because all institutions have their bureaucracy. The University of Illinois has an outsized bureaucratic set of impediments to anything like that. And so I think for ease of mind, it will be easier to partner with people with whom we have a kind of track record of moving vouchers around and paying people and transferring money. Not to say you should be limited to that, because of course part of the job of a project like this is to reflect back to institutions their limitations, infrastructural and bureaucratic, and try to urge them to be more flexible. I won't say that that's been a huge triumphal success, but I think as we gather more and more information over the next 5 years, we're certainly ready to write a big infrastructural white paper on this. So other questions people want to put in the chat? So Ted has asked us, could partnerships with private sector organizations count as community engagement? I think we're thinking about community engagement more as underserved communities, people who really need the kind of money, but also bootstrapping support and visibility. So I think that's a helpful point of clarification. I wouldn't say it's written yet in the CFP, because as I've said, it isn't, but I think our intention is to be distributive in fiscal terms. Other questions about the seed grant in particular? It's very clear in our mind, these calendars, but I realize we haven't talked very much in concrete terms about the seed grant. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yes, John.
Can you just walk through briefly and generally what the parameters of the seed grants are going to be, what the amounts and stipulations are?
So back in the day, at the very beginning of HWW, when we had the first and only other seed grant round, they were quite liberal because the idea was that people would be traveling in the seed grant period to meet up with each other in person, to hash out projects and to meet each other in person. And obviously that is not realistically going to happen in at least in this first cycle of competition. And so each team will be applying for $2,000 worth of seed grant money for expenditure in the summer. And that can be spent on whatever it is you think you need. If you're going to be having conversations with community partners and you wish to remunerate them for those, for their time, if you simply wish to, you know, in a sense, pay the collaborators for their work, there's not as much, we don't have as much imaginative bandwidth at the moment for how that money would be spent. We want to recognize that people will be spending time and labor over the summer doing that. And so it's right now, we don't have a really concrete set of directions for that, but they will be emerging over the course, I imagine, over the course of the next 5 months as we solidify that. So, but as I said, originally, really that money had been designed to bring people face to face.
And John, if I could just add something to that, one of the things that has come up in our conversations over the last year about collaborations is that in my limited experience of the collaborations we have funded, oftentimes the more successful ones in terms of success defined in terms of communications, in terms of deliverables, were collaborations that to some extent pre-existed the call for proposals. And so one of the ways I see the seed grant is really to help either feed existing collaborative relationships you've got and expand those, or to begin to begin cultivating that collaborative relationship so that you can apply a year or 2 years later down the road for the Grand Research Challenge.
So Carolyn Fornoff, our colleague, has asked what kinds of outcomes are expected from Humanities Without Walls projects. We probably will do something pretty detailed, or at least have a list of possible outcomes in the call for proposals. We will be looking for some dimension of public-facing work, perhaps in addition to traditional research outcomes, or in lieu of traditional research outcomes. So we're not, in a sense, already pre-deciding that. And you know, you can go onto the HWW website and see what people have done. You can contact any of the PIs to hear what they have done. There's also the PDF of a brochure, right, Jason, on there of the first 2 cycles of the grant, which does include some material on career diversity, but people have done, I mean, our colleague at MSU, Safwaba Banahampton, had 2 HWW grants in a row. One was much bigger than the second one. She is a professor of French literature, and she produced 2 films on the Hmong experience as it cross-sected from Southeast Asia through France into the United States. She was not a filmmaker before that experience. She became a filmmaker through the team that she assembled. She ended up showing her film at film festivals. She completely remade herself and produced 2 research projects, I would say, that are visual rather than textual, but that's one example of what that might look like. We had a project in the last cycle which staged public gardens in Chicago as part of an environmental, the work of the humanities in a changing climate world. But we also had people who have put on conferences, done edited volumes, put up incredibly elaborate websites that have ongoing usage for in pedagogical and otherwise curricular contexts in their universities and beyond. Our own, I can tell you, I mean, you can see this on the website. We've had 4 really thematic PIs here at Illinois. Anita Chan, who might be here in this room, I'm not sure. I saw she signed up. Anita Chan from then the College of Media, Faranak Maraftab from Department of Urban Planning, John Randolph in the Department of History, and Ryan Griffiths in Art and Design. So we've had 4 PIs on our campus and who've done amazingly diverse things in pursuit of their research questions. So Faranak, basically attempted and to some degree succeeded in solidifying transnational activist networks, some of which have been quite sustainable, some of which were not for obvious reasons. Ryan Griffiths did an installation in Chicago. John Randolph, with his co-PI, Kathy Oberdeck, put on a course here at Illinois called History Harvest, which was about getting community folks to bring in their family heirlooms and create a kind of sense of archival pride and capacity in the community. So I don't know, Carolyn, if that is helpful, but there's just a huge range of opportunities for thinking creatively about what an output would look like and what its connection to research, as you have been trained to understand it, might look like. I don't know, Jenny, if you wanted to weigh in on any of that as part of the methodology aspect of this.
I guess the part of, and this is where the struggle is, right? Because if we're thinking about the outcome, the goal would be an outcome that is co-created and mutually beneficial, right? And decided on with whoever the partners are, whether it's other institutions or community members or various sites. And so I think that might be part of the thing to really strongly consider, right? Who's benefiting from what's produced, what's the goal, what's the outcome. And I think that might shift a little in even how we're thinking about something like public facing, right? So often in terms of Indigenous communities, there's a difference between public facing and community facing, right? Available to everybody versus available to a community. And so I think these are exactly the kind of conversations that will come up and that will make the projects really, really, they already vary from each other dramatically by whoever's coming up with them, but that will adjust and reframe what the goals would be, I think.
I think if you want to think about the seed grant money, it would be really useful, I think, to think about the seed grant money as, and the seed grant summer planning, I guess, as an opportunity to explore the various possibilities of outcome and to think about, sort of spend some time reflecting on, if you've been following the program we've been doing this year, think about what you might have imagined today, and then having, lived through or watched asynchronously some of what we're doing over the next 6 months, what you might be imagining anew in the summer as you think about the actual application. I would say too that, no grant application thinking or preparation ever goes completely to waste. And so we know that there are going to be all kinds of opportunities coming our way, and they are coming our way at a great pace right now for all kinds of funding. And so if you sit through the events that we have planned and you think, you know what, this timing is not right for me. We have another cycle of this research grand challenge in another year. So there are 2 consecutive cycles of this. So if you're not ready for fall of 2021, you might be for fall of 2022. And B, maybe there's something that foundation relations will be watching all of this, and people in the dean's office in FAA and hopefully in the College of Media and Education and all over will be aware of what people are doing and be looking out for opportunities that might in the end be more fitting for the thing that you've ended up conceptualizing. So I think we can think about this really as fertile ground, not to push the seed metaphor too far, but just where there's a horizon of opportunity not limited to HWW. And that's one of the things that a grant like this and in a humanities research institute can actually help to foster and to connect people up, make relationships, or as Jenny and Jason have been saying, solidify relationships that may be tentative or broken by Zoom. I don't know. So people have been madly posting, Jason and Peggy have been madly posting great stuff in the chat. And yes, Mark Pedelti's documentary is just unbelievable. I highly recommend it. And it was an amazingly global team of people that he had on that grant. And yes, so yeah.
So
we also have a lot of hard-won wisdom on how not to collaborate, because there have been some, inevitably some projects that have gone off the rails. Communication is broken down. So our emphasis on the front end on methodology is certainly born out of a commitment to this reciprocity and redistribution ethic. And it also has a kind of practical, operational dimension. I mean, there are ways to collaborate that will be sustainable, and they have to be designed and thought about up front. And then there are ways of thinking like a regular humanist trying to collaborate that are not going to work. And so one of the things we will be talking about, if not in a session dedicated to it particularly along the way, is what it means to be a principal investigator, what it means to take up the responsibility for, heading up a grant, and what kinds of responsibilities that entails in terms of communication, in terms of responsibility for funds, in terms of ultimately the obligation to deliver the deliverables. I think, there are a lot of people here who have done that work, and there are a lot of people for whom that is completely foreign. And so I think conversation about being a PI and how to lead a kind of collaborative team is a really valuable opportunity that we hope to offer as well. Arnab, can you offer some thoughts on how to connect early career researchers to ongoing efforts, or even initiating their own efforts, especially given some of the higher risk with large scale engaged work? Yes. Some guidance on support success rates with proposals, et cetera, might be helpful. So we pretty strongly recommend, given the current reward and incentive structure here at the University of Illinois in the humanities, arts, and to some degree the interpretive social sciences, although not necessarily exclusively, that the PI be a tenured faculty member, because the labor involved in constructing, enacting, and sustaining the work over, the better part of 2 years probably, is big and not necessarily wise for an untenured faculty member to take on, regrettably. Someday in the not too distant future, hopefully in my lifetime, we'll live in an ecosystem where the reward and incentives structure actually recognizes the kind of diverse and public-facing and community-based work that we're trying to nurture here. So aligning those two systems is kind of the institutional challenge. But anybody who's interested in keeping abreast of what's happening can contact us. There are going to be events that we host here. This one is not open to all the consortium. This is just for Illinois folks. But what Jenny is putting on for the fall and what we'll be continuing to be putting on as programming for the spring will be open to consortium members. We are in constant contact with our colleagues, my equivalents, sort of, I guess, in the 16 institutions, and we will be matchmaking with you. We may even be running, oh my God, it won't be me running this, I can tell you that, matchmaking sessions for people. We have a wonderful colleague at the University of Iowa who someday will be watching this video. And I say to you, Teresa Mangum, thank you for all of your out-of-the-box ideas about how to imaginatively convene and bring people together. So she, maybe Iowa or somewhere else will host a matchmaking event where people can find out about projects as they're developing. And certainly, as we head into the seed grant phase, after March and into April, we'll have a very strong sense of who's won seed grants in other institutions, and we'll be able to put together some kind of Google spreadsheet or wiki or something that allows people to see what's happening. So I don't know, Arnab, if that answers your question. And the guidance on support success rates with proposals, et cetera, we don't have those to hand, but Jason can work them up. We can tell you what the numbers have been in the first 4 rounds, and we can even turn our eye on some other dimensions of assessment there. Jason, maybe we can talk about that maybe with Arnab if he has ideas about how he'd like to see the data on that.
Yeah.
We've met some amazing people through this experience, as you might imagine. It's really, I think, broadened all our horizons and made us hopeful over the last 5 years, which, wasn't the darkest time, as it turns out, of the first 2 decades of the 20th century. But, in the wake of 2008 was looking pretty dark for particularly Midwest public research universities, which really make up the majority, Midwest in a broad sense, the majority of our consortial partners. Having $5 million of research money in the consortium precincts in that time period has been kind of heartening for a lot of people, and I think has really catalyzed some people's work, whether mid-career or at the beginning or later career. And as Jason alluded to, we really haven't spent much time here today talking about it, but we have evolved in terms of our appreciation for what it means to create infrastructure that actually enables graduate students to be treated as research partner equals. And so we won't be running the grad lab practicum, to which Jason referred, in quite the same way that we did in the second round, but we will be spending time in the CFP designing requirements for applicants so that they can demonstrate just exactly how they're going to really imagine their graduate student partners as equal ones. Jonathan.
Just one quick additional question. In thinking about the grad lab and that practicum aspect of this, does that tilt the application process toward PhD granting units and programs? We and a number of other units offer MAs, but are primarily undergraduate teaching. Can you just say a little bit more about how the graduate educational aspect has been tied into past projects?
That's a great question. Thank you. And it helps us, I think, to sharpen some of our takeaways around the grad lab practicum experience. So the grad lab practicum is not a substitute for a fellowship for a student. It doesn't stand in for the kind of thoroughgoing support that a department might have. So in the first instance, you can see how then that would not necessarily privilege, PhD department-based students. It really depends on how in your grant you structure that, how you structure the opportunity structure, right? So if you are building we really discourage people not to build grants with specific graduate students in mind, because then it does become really kind of, what's the word, nepotistic, that's a word. And so you would want to think about how you would be recruiting graduate students and in what capacity into the grant, and how you were, if there were a critical mass of them in your grant, how you would be developing the spaces in that grant where they can both engage with faculty, engage with each other, engage with community partners, perhaps even engage with undergraduates. And so how they can pivot in their roles in ways that provide them a kind of maximally diverse experience, but also contribute to the forward motion of the grant. And so that part has to be as designed as every other part of it. And we haven't decided on our end how deterministic to be about that. The grad lab practicum was pretty deterministic. And so having gone in the first round to having nothing, like a kind of Wild West for graduate students, and then in the second round to having a fairly tightly designed, if not necessarily lived, experience for graduate students, I think it's possible today. I'm thinking maybe we might go somewhere, we might make suggestions, but we've always preferred that the design of the grad lab practicum bubble up organically out of the topic, so that someone, interested in the dimensions of, a 14th century Peruvian or Andean cosmology would have very different roles for their graduate students than somebody who is making public gardens in Chicago, or maybe not. I'm not sure, but that in any case, the design for those graduate students ought to emerge organically from the research problem.
And the question, Antoinette, was coming from the place of having run a graduate program for MA students who come and are gone in 2 years, in a 2-year period, and structuring a grant or even beginning to imagine a grant that involves them is tricky, because you don't know what their interests are going to be, where they're going to be coming from. It just sort of changes the calculus, but we can talk about it.
No, that is true. That's a good point. The ramp up, the timeline is a challenge there. Yeah. Okay, I think we're coming to the end. Peggy said that if people want grad lab examples, they can email her. And of course, we're all available 24/7 here at HWWHQ to answer all your questions, to follow up one-on-one with you, or in a protein team that you might be thinking about. That's one of the things that we're really invested in doing. We have to be a little bit careful here in Urbana because we are the headquarters. We don't want to be, we have to be equal opportunity to everyone in the consortium too, but everybody has an HRI in the consortium, and so they have a node in their own space where they're being nurtured and hopefully developed. And our job is to cultivate Illinois to the best of our capacity, and hopefully hope that whatever we learn here outlives HWW itself. So with that, we thank you very much, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.